Hi, a very good afternoon. I'm very delighted to be here. My name is AASHIKA JAIN. I'm the Associate Editor with Entrepreneur Media, heading digital content for Entrepreneur India and Asia Pacific, and hence the panel on what's next for e-commerce in Asia suits well for me. These are my panelists. I'm not going to introduce them separately in the interest of time because we want to get lots of conversation and then some questions, some interesting ones from you guys. To begin with, we have a few investors, a consultant company, entrepreneurs, startup. We're increasingly seeing Asia being the hotbed for different kinds of online businesses, and it's now being driven by a shift in technology. What is most interesting today in Asia is the quick adoption of this technology, and that's what I'm going to discuss with my panelists today. I'm going to start with Maya. Maya, we're seeing a shift in the kind of companies that are being developed out of Asia. Also, the technology that is moving from developed countries to Asia. And also, another very interesting point about entrepreneurs is the opportunity that lies today. You know, in your business and your experience, what have you seen, and what do you feel about this changing ecosystem and its survival?
Perfect. A very interesting question. So to me, I am the founder and CEO of a company named Miss Bees. We do beauty services via our mobile platform, and we deliver the beauty services to your home at your convenience 24/7. So as a mobile company, we see tremendous shifting in the past 3 years. When we started the company, we still were concerned about the adoption of smartphones, which now stopped to be any type of concern. And now we see our customers shifting from e-commerce to mobile e-commerce. And what's interesting about is that we go with our phone everywhere. It's technically becoming slowly and carefully our wearable. And as a wearable, it keeps collecting data about our behavior, our friends, our usage, our purchases. And we can see immediately how we expect, as consumers, the phone to know who we are. So we kind of expect brands to personalize their experience, because if they know and collect this information about us, at least what we can gain out of it is the personalization and the seamless experience that we experience now. So I think that's the major shift, and the way we manage our platform is really to create real-time communication with customers based on the data that we collect. And I think this is also why large corporates now shift to instant messaging and incorporate many technologies in communication with customers to get this real-time, quick response and adapt accordingly.
Okay. John, what is your point of view on that? Do you see Asia upping its game in e-commerce? How is it different from other Western countries?
Yeah, so I run an e-commerce company in Los Angeles. We're about 6 years old, and I think there's been a massive shift in the tools available, the cost of them, and the speed to market over the last, call it, decade. When we launched the Bouqs company in 2012, it wasn't early, but it was certainly earlier than now, and Shopify wasn't a thing then. The tools that were available were so fewer and so much more expensive and so much more complex to actually make work. And I think what's really happened in the Asian market is there's a sort of jumping off point from what has already happened in the US and other Western markets, where the pain of going through that transformation has already been borne by those markets. And the Asian markets are now sort of hitting the ground running in a way that is so much faster because of so many trials and errors and mistakes made within those other markets that they can learn from. I think the mobile shift is another one. You know, when we started the company, 75% of our sales were through desktop. Today, 70% of our sales are through mobile. And that's in a 5-year period. We've seen that shift. And again, when we started the company, we focused on desktop because that's where our sales were. in a lot of these Asian markets, they don't even think about the desktop as a place to start. It's really mobile first. And so I think a lot of the learning and the reps that we've had in the West have helped really accelerate things in Asia.
Well, that's an interesting point to note, that the mobile consumption has led to the boom. I want to know, before I move to the VCs and the consultants, I want to know from SAMMY. SAMMY, in your experience, have you felt that new technology adoption is the driver for the changing ecosystem that we see with respect to e-commerce? And do you see high-end technology beyond mobile? You know, we have e-commerce companies like Amazon looking at experimenting with drones. Where do you see all of that moving?
Thank you very much. Technology enables us now to do so many different things. It helps us achieve our purpose in life much more easily. My own company, we are a life insurance company. Now, who would have thought that a life insurance company can actually create something meaningful and something that's relevant? But we're finding now that technology totally transforms this space. And not only that, we're actually finding new technology. For example, we've created a currency of well-being called a Ucoin. You can earn the Ucoin through very simple things like walking and meditating. And that new currency of well-being, where we actually are collecting data from thousands of well-being apps out there in the ecosystem, and recruiting data scientists to understand that data, and then to create personal pathways for healing and for well-beings to help people live their best lives. It's something that technology can do, which has never been able to do. So the new technology can enable us to live richer, more meaningful lives. That's what I'm particularly excited about.
Okay, we move this conversation to David. David, how much of investor interest lies in the changing ecosystem for e-commerce? We're seeing companies mushrooming at an alarming stage. We have stats that say we have up to 10 companies alone in India that start up on an everyday basis, and these are all driven by technology.
I think the landscape as an investor for e-commerce investment is changing quite a bit. So first of all, OurCrowd's perspective is very broad and global, so I would differentiate what I see going on in more developed markets like the US and Europe versus emerging markets, and then China I kind of put in its own special category. So when I look in the developed markets, I think that the shift to e-commerce is already well underway, so I have pretty much no interest in funding anyone that's trying to sell product online. I mean, I think that's been done already. The one exception to that might be someone that has some kind of amazing new model that's really new, unique, and original that has never been seen before. But other than that, if you're selling product online, that ship has probably sailed. I can tell you that the kind of trends that do interest me are, or that I'm trying to play off of, are things like getting offline and online right. So clearly, Amazon and Alibaba are opening stores. They're going to have a strong presence. That's very challenging for the traditional retailers, but it also opens up an opportunity. So I'm particularly interested in companies that are developing different types of tools that help traditional retailers compete in this emerging world. So that could be things like analytics. So I'm actually launching a new investment on OurCrowd's platform around that in a company called CB4 that's going to be launching soon. I'm also interested in people that are providing critical pieces of infrastructure like delivery systems. There's been a big change in expectations around delivery, and all kinds of retailers need help to be able to compete with what Amazon is doing in that area. And another area I'm interested in is payments. So I think there's still room for innovation in payments. I think credit cards are good for certain use cases, but I think there's interesting new technologies emerging there, so that's pretty much where I'm looking. And then the last one that I'll cite, although I think it'd be a challenge for me to look at, to actually invest in, but I'm open to, are companies that are kind of disrupting a traditional retail sector that has high service requirements. So there's been several examples of that in the US, like mattresses, for example. We just did an investment in Casper, which is a mattress company. You wouldn't think there's too much room for innovation there, but just by bringing it online, providing better service, cutting out the middleman, you can do a lot. So that's been played out quite a bit in the US. I think that in other geographies, it's still kind of early days, so there might be some opportunity there. But.
Two interesting points to be noted there. I'm going to get Mario there. You're almost sounding like a death knell for e-commerce online, but the savior is that you say that payment space still has the window for growth. Mario, tell me, in your opinion, how much of what has existed in the US and other countries has percolated to other countries? Have you seen a ripple effect? And do you feel that the US has reached the epitome of their growth and now there's not much more room left, and that room will then be filled by other countries?
Okay, interesting. So first of all, definitely, I think there's a ripple effect in several countries, right? Because you have large amounts of capital in the US, so you can test a lot, fail a lot. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to fail always, right? But you can test a lot, you can fail, and because the size of the market, you get to test and try new things, and that gets rippled to everywhere. So I'm from Mexico City, actually. I'm not from the US. And we see a lot of direct-to-consumer startups, which is the most, I'd say the hottest thing in e-commerce, which is D2C brands. There are just copycats from the US or from elsewhere. And I've heard, I don't know very much about Asia, but I've heard that it's the similar case.
It's interesting that you spoke about copycats, because I think Asia is acing that game completely. But with respect to innovative technologies, I'll take that from Maya. Maya, tell me, do you see the shift in tech helping Asian ecosystem bring out newer formats? This is more a question for the VCs because they're scouting for newer formats, but as an entrepreneur, do you see newer formats emerging? Because mobile technology is something which didn't see as much adoption just 2 years from now. But today the game has completely changed. We're in 2019. We cannot imagine a country as developing as India also with lower percolation of mobile.
So what I think, it might be not very popular by the VCs here, but I have to say that in the past 3 years that we've been meeting many investors all across the world, many VCs use this term deep tech. Like, how do you utilize deep tech into your platform, and like what kind of tools, and like why e-commerce is less interesting in their perspective than other deep tech companies. And I have to say that deep tech is basically a technology that is developed for some kind of a purpose. And the way today, I mean, AI is available for all type of platforms and products, and it's very easy to implement for any company. And actually, I think most of the e-commerce brands have to implement this type of deep tech to become smarter and improve the experiences on their platform. So I think nowadays in Asia and all over the world, all e-commerce brands have to deploy a lot of technologies to become more scalable, approachable, and easy to use. And also I mentioned before personalization. So we deploy AI to improve basically the experience of our customers and our suppliers. But it's not only AI, it's about image recognition and voice. For example, if somebody sits in London in their home and says, Alexa, can I book my mani for tomorrow? This is a completely different experience what we had with e-commerce 3 years ago. So I think those technologies should rise, and they are rising all over the world and in Asia.
John, your point of view on deep tech. Are companies able to adapt deep tech as seamlessly as Maya mentioned? And if there is room to maneuver, where does the room exist?
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology has to fit the consumer need and not the other way around. So I think that there's certainly an opportunity to adapt any technology for almost any use, but the question is, does it, especially in the e-commerce world, does it make the transaction more efficient, more interesting, more engaging? Does it make you more money or not? And so technology for technology's sake, especially in e-commerce, is fool's gold, and I've seen plenty of companies that come along with a lot of fanfare and then go away very quickly. You know, one of my venture capital investors 3 years ago said to me, Facebook Messenger is coming out with a thing where you can purchase through it. We absolutely have to be there. That's where everyone's going to go. And our largest competitor, 1-800-Flowers, went and spent a bunch of money and a bunch of time implementing on Facebook Messenger, and no one buys through Facebook Messenger. Why? Because no one wants to buy through Facebook Messenger. That is not the way that people want to transact. They go to Facebook Messenger to talk to their cousin, to talk to their friend, to see what's going on with somebody. It's not a place they go to shop. And so technology for technology's sake is a waste of resources, a waste of attention, especially for a startup company. And so I think that it's certainly possible that with all the new platforms that have come along, that there's opportunities to make the customer's experience better. And I'm sure, again, as I mentioned earlier, that the Asian market in particular can sort of piggyback on top of all the mistakes that we've all made in the West and do it faster and better as a result. But I think it really has to come back to the customer's need, especially in an e-commerce transaction. I think one of the places where I keep seeing more interesting things happening is automating the transaction so the customer doesn't have to make it in the first place. So subscription, one-click commerce, voice commerce, anything that takes away the need to sign up, put in your payment information, put in your delivery address, et cetera, is going to win over the long run because you're making the customer's life easier, not just creating another thing to sell. And I think the more that e-commerce or marketplace models or whatever it is, whatever these brands can do to reduce that friction and make it more enjoyable or at the least, more efficient for the buyer, those are the types of companies that are going to win.
David, I would like your point of view there. Do you think that the mistakes made by the West, two people mentioned this in this panel, that the mistakes made by the West are interesting to note for mistakes not to be made in Asia, which is at this point in time experimenting with varied online businesses? Do you feel that this is the differentiator as well as the benefit that Asia will have in leapfrogging?
I mean, I'll preface this by saying Asia is a big place. I've been to many different countries, and they all have their own customs and ways of doing things, so I find it hard to generalize. But that said, I think if you look at the emerging markets in Asia, there's the possibility for leapfrogging around commerce, because I know from my travels in India, for example, the retail sector is underdeveloped there. So people aren't used to the going to big shopping malls to the same degree that they are in the West, and that's true in other emerging markets. So I think what we've seen in payments is a good example. I mean, I think with mobile payments, many countries in the East have just kind of leapfrogged the West and are far ahead, and that provides kind of an underlying platform to experiment with new types of commerce that could be very revolutionary. So I'm open to that. I'm also intrigued with ideas about how to kind of have things happen in the reverse and see what the West can learn from what's happening in Asia, because I think there's some sectors where really the innovation is being driven out of Asia because, like we've seen in the past in other areas, you're not trying to disrupt some kind of legacy, you can kind of take a fresh start.
I'm glad as an Asian to hear that the West can learn a bit from Asia. I want to know from you, Sammy, you're in the financial services space. Of course, emerging markets in Asia are setting example for innovation in fintech space. I'm not completely sure if it would be right to say that they have aced the West, but what can be right to be said is that the developing models which may interest VCs like David. I want to know from you, in the financial services space, do you also feel that the formats that are being experimented in Asia are interesting and they are going to be developing the brands of tomorrow?
I'm very inspired by what's going on in Asia, in fintech. There's been a lot of innovation, especially around banking. And there's been a lot of innovation there. What I'm particularly excited, though, about is really the evolution of insurance. That particularly is a sector for me that I find fascinating. The last 10 years, we've seen so much disruption in fintech, and I think insurtech has lagged behind. It's probably 5 or 10 years behind the rest of the fintech industry. There's been a lot of innovation in insurtech in the US, and we're starting to see that now in the UK and in Asia. In the insurtech space, we're seeing a lot of innovation on the property and casualty side, so home insurance, car insurance, and these standard property insurance. What interests me is the last frontier of insurance is the life insurance space, and that's the sector that I find fascinating, and I'm particularly impressed by what's going on around Asia in that space. Some of the conversations I've had here, certainly with partners, potential partners in Korea, in India, in different countries, whereby we're seeing real innovation, both in the digital space. You know, obviously the market in insurance has been an intermediated space for years. It's broker-driven, it's paper-driven, it can take weeks, but now we're seeing real innovation emerging out of Asia around digital capability, where you can actually get insured life insurance in minutes rather than weeks, where you can, it's all paperless, where you don't have to go through a broker. There are 1 or 2 outliers that are obviously really hugely ahead of the game. And it's a very exciting phenomenon. I think there's going to be a huge growth there. So I'm very inspired, especially being at the conference here and meeting partners who are thinking about the space and really progressive thinking.
Mario, I'm going to take this with you. We're not only experiencing a shift in e-commerce in the payment space or in the online shopping space, but there are many other sectors that are seeing a shift to online businesses, and that's affecting the traditional businesses, as David said. I would agree with him, specifically in the scope of Asia, where adoption of internet as well as adoption of technology, I mean, to forget deep tech, just adoption of simple internet has been absolutely phenomenal, and something that has taken a very long time for emerging countries like India. I want to know from you, is there interest for investors? Is there interest for companies to look at Asia as the hotbed? Do you come across queries? Do you come across companies that are looking to move east instead of setting shop in the West?
Yeah, I think there's definitely interest. I mean, when you think about digital technology and technology in general, what we're looking at, especially in terms of e-commerce, we want to enhance the customer experience. And we want to basically enhance the customer experience, hack the current experience, disrupt the traditional businesses. So I think it's something that doesn't really have to do with a specific geography or territory, but most relevant, where are these talents, where are these people that are disrupting significantly a pretty well-established business, or where are these new business models, new types of brands, new breed of e-commerce players that are really doing it well from a customer perspective, from a supplier perspective, payments perspective, because e-commerce is rather broad, right? It's not I mean, it's a big thing, and there are many touch points. So I think looking at it really gets you a general overview of what can be disrupted. And what's interesting in emerging markets, it's usually they leapfrog things, right? So sometimes, for instance, we are also an emerging market, and it's also relevant for us to understand how we can leapfrog and how we can solve and tackle issues like infrastructure. For instance, mobile speeds. Probably the mobile speeds are not the same as in the US or in Israel. So that's really important for us, actually sometimes more important than the more developed countries.
Sure. The point about globalization, of course, and it being a global phenomena, that's a great point. John, I would like your comment on that. When we're talking about e-commerce being a global phenomena, do you feel that have you in your experience felt that today's entrepreneurs are inclined to start businesses in the East? There is a general perception globally that the East is growing and the scope of growth in East is magnanimous. Do you also feel, with your perspective, being an entrepreneur from the West?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of capital flowing, you know, if you look at 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, the place you went to get money was Silicon Valley, and that was almost a global thing. And over the past 10 years, roughly, it's really spread across the United States. You know, we're in Los Angeles. There's a much larger, much more mature, much more established venture community, a lot more dollars flowing into that community. And really, I mean, Asia Pacific has rocketed past sort of all of those other markets. And I think part of it's fueled by the overall region's growth in general. You know, just, you know, household income growing, job growth growing, GDP growing, and the investment of local governments behind that as well, and sort of the ability to move that, you know, outside of the private sector. And so, you know, if I was going to go, if I had my druthers and could launch a company anywhere, anytime, I think I'd be looking really hard at, you know, Asia Pacific and you know, the U.S. as my two places. The really nice thing about going into a less defined or less mature market is you just have more room to play. There aren't as many rules or established processes or hoops to jump through. There aren't as many entrepreneurs, so you don't have as much competition for capital. And so I think it's really intriguing as an entrepreneur to think about what that could be. Now, me personally, I have absolutely zero experience launching or running any kind of a business in Asia, so I wouldn't go do that. But if it was a sort of a level playing field where either or was possible from a personal experience or opportunity perspective, I would certainly think about it.
Fantastic points made. Lack of competition as well as you know, more room to play. Maya, do you agree to that? And do you think expansion of companies today to Asia Pacific is something that is on the minds of entrepreneurs in more developed technology-driven ecosystems?
Obviously. So in the past, I think 2-3 years, we've been approached by many partners in Asia. It's an ongoing thing. They basically looking to bring more technologies into their markets, and obviously for each entrepreneur, it's a huge opportunity, needless to say. So the way we see it, basically, if in the past, an old-fashioned and fragmented market like myself, beauty salons and spas and hairstylists, it was a small business that you cannot leverage into something big. And now, as a marketplace, we take our platform and the technology and we make it available for thousands and millions. And then once an Asian partner, as John said, I didn't do it myself personally. I didn't build or grow business in Asia yet. But if there was an opportunity, solid opportunity with a big partner and significant one, and trustful, I'd say, then the marketplace gives a perfect opportunity based on its scalable technology to just simply launch in any location. So I think in that sense, it could be in a model of franchising or partnership or distribution or whatever. It makes it very easy, accessible, and a big opportunity, yes.
Okay. David, I'll take this question with you. There are, as John and Maya said, that you could just set up shop anywhere when there's enough room to play. Countries like India and China are waking up to this fact, and the governments feel that it is time to pull the hook and define guidelines better than they were defined earlier. They also feel that when international companies come in, they do bring interesting opportunities, but the Indian as well as the Chinese entrepreneurs themselves feel a bit crushed with the competition that comes in with more advanced technologies and more advanced companies with good capital at hand. In this ecosystem, do you feel that VCs acknowledge this fact? And is this a point of contention in the investor community for specifically e-commerce businesses?
Well, I would draw a big distinction between China and India because the regulatory environments are extremely different. So, you know, China has kind of walled off its internet, and that's been great for Chinese entrepreneurs because they've been able to grow businesses without really having to compete with the West. So, you know, for example, Amazon, as far as I know, doesn't have any presence there, any plans to go in, whereas Amazon has placed a big bet in India, and Walmart made a big acquisition there. So there's clearly it's a different environment. I mean, overall, I think open markets are better for the world. So I think you know, I'd be happy to see China adopt a more open stance. But that said, there's also, because of what's happened in China, I think there's also a lot of innovation that has grown up in that ecosystem that could be exported to the West. So, I mean, when it comes to e-commerce, I think that technology is kind of an enabler, although there are, you do see examples of kind of unique technologies that companies have developed, but I think the technical tools are becoming more and more accessible to everyone. So when I look at evaluating an e-commerce business, I'm more interested in understanding the market dynamics and what the unique business model is and how they can, you know, take advantage of the regulatory environment or cultural differences or some other factor in their market to get some kind of sustainable competitive advantage. The bread and butter tools, I think, are more and more open to everyone with cloud computing.
We have 15 minutes now. I quickly move on to the most important question of this panel, which is what next for e-commerce? And I'm going to get Sammy to first tell me this. What do you think is going to be the next big thing in e-commerce? Deep tech, percolation of technology when you're talking about developing and open markets? Or do you feel that AI, drones, robotics, is that going to take over? Or do you feel that consumer will still be the king and traditional businesses will continue to prosper irrespective of what technology comes in?
Yeah, I'm going to take the answer. Maybe I go in a different direction, if I may, because the panel was also about purpose-driven brands. And I believe when you say what's next for me in technology, I would say the answer is purpose. We've been very good in the world about building great technology, but there's a crisis just generally in the world today. There's a crisis of well-being. There's a crisis of loneliness. There's a real disconnect of people. People are lonely, people are struggling. People are wanting technology now to service them in a way that will help them lead better, richer lives. We're seeing a social media, especially as amongst young people, having social, being obsessed or a rise in depression and mental illness. And I think the next big thing for tech is really to work out why are we doing all of this? What is the purpose? And I think purpose-led brands, purpose-led companies that really start to harness technology for the well-being of others, I think they will emerge as the real winners in the next decade. You look at companies like Calm, which only 2 years ago launched a well-being mindfulness app, which has already had millions of downloads. They became a unicorn a couple of weeks ago. Just within 2 years, just helping people simply breathe. That's all they do really, is they help people breathe and just feel their body 5-10 minutes a day. We ourselves are building that. We're building a life insurance company that inspires life and puts you at the center. You know, for 200 years, insurance companies have been focused on what happens when you die. But surely a life insurance company should really help you live life and help you live a longer, happier life. So I feel that purpose is really the next big thing.
David, what do you think is the next big thing in e-commerce? What is going to be the investor interest besides being only driven by open markets, or also being driven by the more lucrative exit opportunities, what is it that VCs are definitely going to see in the e-commerce space? Any sector that you would like to earmark? Very happy for that.
That's a hard question to answer, because if I really knew, I probably wouldn't want to tell you, but probably want to keep that to myself. But I can tell you, when I look at technologies, one thing that I'm intrigued by and have been trying to study is new innovation in payments and trying to figure out how blockchain could be applied to e-commerce. So I think that if we really see the emergence of kind of an open blockchain platform, that could be quite disruptive to some types of businesses. So I'll give you an example of that. There are businesses like Netflix and other competitors that basically aggregate together a lot of digital assets, and there's a whole bunch of businesses where the strength is really in the aggregation. You can create an open platform where rights management and usage rights can be baked into the asset, and the asset can kind of flow on its own. That could be quite disruptive to the aggregator. So that's an idea that I'm kind of interested in. I think there's also just a lot of room to disrupt the way, through blockchain and technologies like that, disrupt the traditional way of payments, which are really quite antiquated. And that is something I do find very interesting in Asia, because credit card penetration generally in most countries was lower, and there's a whole bunch of people that never had a credit card and probably never will. I think there's a lot of innovation going on there that could be quite groundbreaking as well.
I'm glad you said the word blockchain. Nobody said it in this tech panel. I was wondering when it's going to come. But, and also glad that you're aware of the ground realities of markets in Asia. Maya, your closing comments on, what do you see next in e-commerce? You're already acing the game in mobile. Is there more that your company sees, as well as in expansion? What would be ideal for a company like yours that is already in a developed ecosystem? What would be ideal for a company like yours for expansion?
So in terms of expansion, there are like a few paths for many e-commerce brands, not only us. We can always grow geographically and expand to Asia, which is a great opportunity, and other markets. We can expand the offering, but I think in terms of trends in the world, no matter what we do, we need to improve the experience for the customer. I think many brands now recognize the need to have memorable experiences on top of their platforms. And I think these are the most difficult, but also inspiring to create, because eventually you bring value to people's life. And Sammy mentioned people's value and people's quality of life. So I think with us, we are a lifestyle company. We want to create experiences that give women the opportunity to become healthy, fit, and beautiful, even when they don't have the time and the priority for it. And our gig economy platform works with thousands of self-employed professionals that we give them the opportunity to build their business on top of our platform. So I think the experience has to be memorable, easy, fast, and the connectivity between other platforms and other ideas. And we mentioned vocal, we mentioned different technologies. These tied up together create really a different world of easier and more memorable experiences.
John, your closing comments on what do you see as the next thing in e-commerce? You're free to talk about Asia, but of course, since your focus area is Western, I want to know from you, what is it that you see as the next thing in e-commerce? Blockchain is the tip of the pinnacle, and there's nothing more about that at this point.
Yeah, I actually think blockchain is one big bubble, and there will be almost no real applicable value in it whatsoever.
Jamie Dimon said the same about Bitcoins.
No, I understand what blockchain is. I don't think the applications are close to what everyone says they're going to be. Look, in e-commerce, there's been these waves of trends that everybody was supposed to do. So first it was, there was just standard e-commerce, and then there was subscription e-commerce, which I actually think there's a lot more room in that trend to go. Then it was social commerce, which ended up not really being a thing, but it sounded really cool, and a bunch of people like Fab.com raised hundreds of millions of dollars when there was not really much there. Then there was Uber for insert your business, and it was all about fast delivery, but it turns out that most people don't need most things that fast. As a quick side note, I went out and pitched my company around the time that Uber for everything was the trend, and everyone said, hey, you should do Uber for flowers. Like, that's what you should do, because imagine if you could get it really fast. And I was like, you can. Just go on any website and order it, and it'll show up today. There's these big fads that have hit e-commerce over time. And I think going back to what Maya said a moment ago, the companies that make it through all that are the ones that deliver unique experiences, better value for the customer. And so I think whatever is the next thing is ultimately not going to matter all that much. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of hype in Silicon Valley, and everyone's going to talk about it, and there's going to be a bunch of startups get funded, and then the really great companies that just create a better experience at a better price are going to be the ones that win. I do think the one big trend that I think is kind of scary for e-commerce is that with the amount of capital that's available in the world for new startups, and with the amount of niche focus that each additional brand can bring, I think it gets harder and harder to build really big companies on the back of e-commerce alone. And I think that's why we're starting to see almost every e-commerce company become a retail company in terms of physical retail once they get to a certain stage. Once you hit sort of $150 million in top line online, it's almost impossible to grow at a meaningful pace without a physical retail presence. And so you see Warby Parker, you see Bonobos, you see all of these brands creating these online, offline experiences because that's where they get marginal value for the customer. They can try it on in the store, or they can return it easier, or whatever it might be. And so I think there's going to be this continued proliferation of brands which serve narrower and narrower customer bases, which means being a really big brand is really hard. Because Amazon has already owned that, and I think you'll see more and more of the ones that do make it out end up with a physical retail presence as well.
I see. So omni-channel is going to be the next in e-commerce. I see. And I want your last comments also on what next you see in e-commerce, specifically with respect to the investment ecosystem. Do you think that investors are going to go the blockchain way, or they're going to go the omni-channel way?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to go, well, it's my thought, I don't think they're going to go to the blockchain way. I do think that, I would say a word that basically summarizes everything, which is frictionless experiences. That means being able to deliver personalized and really rich experiences for customers. So my guess, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's a specific technology that's going to take over. I do think that the brands that solve the most frictions, both on an emotional and functional way, which is purpose, of course, and then all the tools that in payments, et cetera, that let you deliver on time at the right price. Those are the ones that are definitely more relevant. And I do think that there's also a huge room to improve how we buy products in e-commerce that don't have that many digital attributes, right? So there's huge room in technologies that allow us to try, test, sample products that are not digitally native, and that's probably one of the biggest frictions I see.
I see. So this is a very, very ultra positive panel. They want e-commerce to grow, and they're confident that it's slated for some good times.
Well, yeah, because e-commerce accounts just for probably 10% of the total retail sales in the US, 15% in the UK, probably 1% in Mexico, for instance. So there's huge room for growth.
Potential for growth. Okay, we have very, very quickly room for 2 questions, about 3 minutes. So 2 questions for the panel. Anybody would like to ask anything? Can we have the lights on? No worries. We'll just quickly go on with the questions. Anybody has any questions in the room for the panelists? No questions? Okay.
Here.
So I'm Cyprian, I'm from Romania, and I have a digital agency, and most of our customers have an online presence, they have online shops. And what we see is that when people first time interact with the website, they go mobile. But after 2 or 3 visits on the website, they prefer to finish the shopping on desktop or on laptops, tablets, whatever. So I was wondering if you think that the more, the bigger the value the item has, the more trust people have in other devices than mobile, and if you think there's going to be a change in the future.
Would you like to take that, Maya? Would you like to take that?
What is your name? Cyprian. So Cyprian says that many of their customers discover products on mobile, is that correct? And then actually purchase them using their desktop. So, well, with us being a mobile-first company, obviously we don't see that, but I would say that it really depends what is the transaction level, like how expensive the product is, and what is the commitment that you have in that purchase. So I think based on the level of commitment, you should create the funnel for your customer and decide what platform to sell the product on. So if if it's like a, I don't know, a car, a dealership, and you discover and look through the cars on mobile, obviously you're not going to make a purchase of, I don't know, $20,000 instantly on your mobile. You probably want to look on some more dealership or like compare pricing or whatever, so you need more research. So I think it really up to the funnel and the conversion rate of each platform to decide which way to go. So I think it's best to start the process on mobile in that case and continue to desktop, but then I would say that the repeat purchase of the same customer on the same platform would actually be from the mobile.
I think the time is up, so yeah, perfect timing.
Good.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think the mic is going to be off since the time is up. Anyway, thank you for patiently listening to us. I want to thank this panel. My deep gratitude for the kind of patience and the valuable comments that you guys shared with me. Thank you so much.